Here's a scenario. A girl is 29 years old, she's watching a movie, and suddenly she has a flashback. She's 7, at home with her grandfather. Later, more memories emerge. She was abused as a child, and she had no memory of it until now. So what happened to her memory over all this time? Was it repressed? Is it false? Or was it simply mislaid? It's been a source of at times acrimonious academic debate, but with new ideas emerging, it's worth taking a fresh look at recovered memories. Before we dive in, a quick refresher on what memory is, because one thing it isn't is a video recorder. First, we encode. An event happens, we hold some details in short-term memory. Then there's consolidation. Important bits are mentally rehearsed, then stored in long-term memory, which effectively means little groups of neurons hold a perception of the event. Then retrieval. The little neurons are activated, the perceptions are integrated and reconstructed and enter consciousness. This newly rehearsed memory is then re-encoded, either just as it was before or altered, sometimes dramatically, and stored. So something interfered with the process here, but what? Therein lies the big debate.
Hi.
Psychiatrist Warwick Middleton specialises in patients with memories of extreme trauma. He believes what happens is a process known as dissociation and repression.
Dissociation is a mechanism in which there is a disruption in the usually integrated processes of consciousness, memory, identity and perception, such that a person's identity may be split, fractionated or put behind if you want to use a computer analogy, a firewall.
He sees it in combat veterans.
It was Sargent and Slater in 1940 who analysed 1,000 evacuees from Dunkirk. 144 actually had partial or complete amnesia. And the ones that were most likely to have the most extreme amnesias were also the ones that had the most severe traumas.
Do they get those memories back?
Some of them do.
And that's where repression and later recovery of those memories comes in. Or, to use Professor Middleton's preferred term, dissociative amnesia.
You talk about the 1,000-yard stare.
But Professor Richard Bryant, who also works with war veterans as a prominent researcher of post-traumatic stress disorder, disagrees. He says the battle situation is better described as largely a failure to encode.
In a case of real trauma like combat, when there are bombs exploding and people shooting at me, then that's really going to narrow my attention enormously. So it's very, very understandable that people will have reduced encoding of it.
Just think of a parachute jump for the first time. Afterwards, few remember anything much.
That's not necessarily dissociation in the sense that I have a fault in my remembering. A lot of it I just didn't encode in the first place.
And our memory's need for narrative will sometimes try and fill in the gaps.
I saw a person years ago who had a severe brain injury in a car accident, and he was knocked out for nearly a month. About a year later, first time they put him in the car, he just panicked and was flooded with memories of the accident. Now, this man did not remember anything about what happened. So how could he have memories? When I spoke to him, the pictures that were coming into his mind was of himself lying mangled in the car. And what these pictures were actually a reconstruction of photographs of his mangled car in the local newspaper, except he had put himself into that photograph.
But failure to encode would not account for the long-standing memory loss in our scenario, not when the abuse was repeated. It could, of course, be a false memory, unintentionally implanted by sloppy therapy. And it was a bizarre spate of these, paraded as repressed memories, that set off the so-called memory wars of the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, the issue of false memory actually coalesced into probably what was the most acrimonious and polarising debate in psychology, psychiatry in the last century.
Unfortunately, the debate became either or. Either you believed in dissociation and repression, or that traumatic memories were so powerfully laid down they were unforgettable, so recovered memories must be false.
I think at that point we got where the baby did get thrown out with the bathwater, where because we said, no, there's no evidence that repression exists now, we got to the point where saying, well, not only does repression not exist, but also the idea that somebody can actually have a memory, then forget it, and then maybe have it again, that also doesn't exist.
So, to be clear, recovered memories of childhood abuse can and do happen, a notion that got muddied at the height of the memory wars. The question remains, though, how? Professor Middleton says this is where the dissociation theory really comes to the fore.
I'm talking about compartmentalising trauma, so that you actually create a mechanism for containing the memories and feelings that go with a traumatic event such that it doesn't overwhelm you in the present. So you can actually get somebody who's compartmentalised, the good daddy, as distinct from another compartment behind another firewall which contains the memory of the incestuous abuse. And the two states may be relatively impervious to the other, at least for a time.
But a number of researchers are now working on another explanation. That is, that in many cases, the abused kids simply forgot. Huh?
Many will say that at the time they did limit their encoding. And they did it very strategically. I don't want to be aware about what this person's doing to me right now, so I will engage in fantasy. I will distract myself. But that doesn't block it out necessarily. After that, he might have left the room, and then there's the consolidation phase. Now, often at that point, the person will often tell me, I don't want to think about it then. I will distract myself again. But they still know that things happened. But after that, I think as time goes on, both in the consolidation phase and subsequently, I'm just not rehearsing it because I don't want to. And so I can go through years and years and years and never think about it. And then something tweaks. And then, oh yeah, that did happen to me. And then they'll remember it. Now, what was that mechanism? Was it repression? I don't think so. In most cases I've seen, I think it is often deliberate avoidance over many, many years because people don't want to think about something that's really, really unpleasant.
So what are we to make of all this? In the end, does it just come down to a terminology dispute? Is there so much difference between dissociation and repression versus forgetting that the debate still matters? There are some professors who say dissociation doesn't exist.
Yeah, there are some who say that. It's actually one of the phenomena in psychiatry that's got the longest literature, really.
Although the word repression does seem to be dropping out of favour.
I've given up trying to get a clear, agreed definition of repression anymore because the waters have been so muddied.
My reaction to the whole notion of dissociation is that it's really not advancing the field. It's just too big and too vague. So I think we have a clinical responsibility, as well as a scientific responsibility, to understand what really is the mechanism. Then I think we can start to develop better treatments.
And does this help our girl deal with her past? Maybe not, but it is worth knowing there's more than one explanation for recovered memory. After all, memory is perception, and perception becomes memory.